So the Blade Blast Inquisitor was my league start, and while it did go quite well for me, I know a bunch of people have been having issues, mainly with ultimatums. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the updates that I've made to the build, as well as how it fares in ultimatums, so let's get into it. Hey guys, Big Ducks here and welcome back to the channel. Now remember, if you're enjoying this style of content, make sure that you like this video. Also, over 75% of you are still not subscribed to this YouTube channel. So if you're enjoying my particular style of content, make sure that you subscribe so that these videos will show right up in your feed, and you can always change your mind later. Now without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright boys, so the Blade Blast Inquisitor was my league start, and I know a lot of you have been expressing concerns to me over at my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/bigducks, which you should go follow by the way. But if you have been over there, you've probably known that I have addressed most of these concerns already. I've talked with a lot of people in chat, and we kind of have figured out that ultimatums in general are pretty difficult for certain kinds of builds, and this build isn't suited too well for ultimatums, mainly because of the overwhelming amount of enemies that spawn and the fact that they can spawn on top of you. Now, there was no way for us to really know how the ultimatum mechanic would work. However, I do want to say that it doesn't feel like the ultimatum mechanic is insanely profitable. Like, it's something that you can do, but honestly, it feels like most of the profit from ultimatums is from farming lower tier maps anyways, which this build can do perfectly fine. But it doesn't really feel like high tier ultimatums have done much for me, at least at this point. I've been doing like red tier ultimatums and the rewards don't seem much better than yellow tier or white tier ultimatums anyways, so it doesn't really feel like I had much reason to do them. I do want to go over a couple of things. I know a lot of people don't check the updates on the path of building, so I do want to make sure that you know the path of buildings for builds do get updated over the course of the league, especially towards the beginning of the league if there are issues with it, and this is no exception. I have updated it multiple times already, but I do want to give a pretty big disclaimer here. I did say in both of the other videos, in the one that was the actual league start video for this build, as well as the video that was the like the overall view video of everything, this is not a tanky build, and it is also not a new player friendly build. This is not a build that is meant for a new player to come into the game for their first time playing and just be able to annihilate the game no problem whatsoever, right? So what I do want to say is that if you are a new player, I would suggest a different build. Try Creeping Frost or try Poison Blade Vortex Assassin. Those builds should be much more suited for someone who doesn't know more of the mechanics of the game. There is a update to the path of building for this particular build, and that is a block update. Now this block update actually came out the day before the league release, so if you haven't seen it, it's been in there for quite some time, so make sure that you go and check it out. The idea being is that in that block update, I did change the tree around a little bit just to give some more defenses early on in the league, because I was trying to push ultimatums. Honestly, with like hindsight vision, I wouldn't even have really pushed the block version of the build if I'm being perfectly honest with you, because I don't think that ultimatums are very worthwhile and this build isn't suited towards them. Poison Blade Vortex Assassin is way more suited towards ultimatums because ultimatums require you to be able to move while doing damage, as well as dodge is very well suited for ultimatums. So if you're looking for something that can actually farm ultimatums, try something that is a more dodge oriented build. This one is not really suited for it. This is more of a boss killer as well as a high-end mapper. I really don't think that ultimatums are a great suit for this build. I think that Razor of the Seventh Sun is actually the best budget weapon early on for this build. It is significantly better than Dietus now that I have like played through it and tested it and everything like that. And I still do believe that Chernobog's Pillar is probably the better of the offhands if we're talking about a shield. I did mess around with Ghastly Theater, and I know a couple of people saw me playing with this on my Twitch stream, and they were asking me about it. And while I think that the shield is good and it does enable you to use some more auras early on before you get Intuitive Leap, I do just kind of feel like Chernobog's is better because of the chance to enfeeble on hit, as well as giving you the rest of your conversion. It's got life, it's got fire resistance, it's got a ton of armor, a decent chance to block, and that enfeeble is really, really powerful for surviving early on. It's super cheap. This shield does give you the physical Aegis, but the problem with the physical Aegis is if you're getting hit all the time, it's just depleted constantly. The cast speed and the attack speed is really nice for charging around and moving and all that kind of stuff, and that's all great. But typically the Aegis gets depleted pretty quickly, so that nearby enemies are blinded thing doesn't really happen super often. It's good while just randomly clearing maps, but this build doesn't have problems while randomly clearing maps. The level 20 physical Aegis is just 1,000 physical damage shield, as you can see here. It just puts this little bubble around you, very similar to the Elementalist. It's just physical damage instead of elemental damage. That ability is okay, but I still do feel the Chernobog's is better. I also did use Shield Charge, like I was saying, with faster attacks, Fortify, and then I just had Enduring Cry in the link. That did give us an extra layer of defense early on. While those things are good, and I think that it's fine to use that in the budget version of the tree early on, I do feel that this build excels much better once you swap over. Now, one of the changes that I did make that I was talking about before was this Essence Offhand. I can say that Fire Burst is actually very good. I would say that Fire Burst is basically the same as casting like 5 more Blade Blasts randomly. If we look at our Blade Blast damage, you'll see that the average damage is 9,000 to 14,000, right? That is the average damage of the spell. If you look at Fire Bursts, the average damage is 47,000 to 78,000. That's quite a bit more. That's like 5 times the amount of damage. This can proc every second, and it procs anytime that you hit any enemy with any ability. So this is a pretty decent damage upgrade, and Fire Burst can be linked to things in your offhand. So I have kind of abandoned Vol Righteous Fire because of the changes that they made to it, and I've updated to using just Controlled Destruction, Elemental Focus, as well as Fire Pin in the offhand with this. I still don't know if it's necessarily better to do, because it's much harder to get a Fire Burst offhand that both has the extra crit multi as well as the physical damage gained as fire. Those modifiers are very powerful, so if you can get Fire Burst plus one of those, it's definitely a significant upgrade for clear. However, I'm going to say that on bosses, I do think that a offhand with just the normal damage stats is going to be better if you can't get Fire Burst plus those. You get this through crafting with an Essence of Hysteria, so those are pretty expensive. They probably will go down in price as the league gets longer, so just keep that in mind. This is pretty good. I haven't really noticed too huge of a change in damage from the changes that happened with Blade Blast. I know it got nerfed by like 30% or something like that. It ended up being okay. My damage is still really good all the way up through tier 16 maps. I haven't had any problem with killing anything. I am not as fully invested as I was before, but I have still done quite well. The price of the gear has gone down. It's not insanely expensive anymore. Volconus, last I checked, was like 10C. Crown of the Inward Eye was actually pretty expensive early on in the league, but it has gone down as well. And that's pretty much it for the build, for the updates that we've done. Nothing else has really changed with the tree. It's still the same tree I was doing before. You still use the same cluster jewels, and nothing else really has changed. I do want to talk a little bit about ultimatums before we jump into Path of Building and I talk about that block tree. Ultimatums, while they were kind of difficult early on, I did swap to that block tree and started having basically no issues with them. However, I still do feel that this build is not really geared towards ultimatums at all, and I highly suggest that you don't focus on doing them with this build, at least until you get much more invested. Once you get up to like 4 or 5k health and you have like 4 or 5k energy shield, and you've got all of your damage and you've got everything invested, you can absolutely annihilate them, but that requires the Glorious Vanity, that requires all of those extra pieces of gear where once you have invested more fully into the build, ultimatums will be a little bit more viable. But at the current level of gear that I'm at, I've only spent, I don't know, 2 Exalt, and that was before everything went way down in price. My gear is probably only worth like 1, maybe 1.5 Exalt at most right now, because I spent like 30C on my chest piece, I spent like 10C on the rings, the Volconus I spent like 75C on, but those have all gone down in price quite a bit now. I would say that survival ultimatums are very difficult because you're trying to survive, and that's not really great for this build when you're stuck in that little tiny circle. I would say that the Stone Circles ultimatums are okay, but they're still a little tough. However, the just kill enemies ultimatums are actually pretty easy because this build kills stuff really quickly. However, once again, I really wouldn't suggest pushing ultimatums. So that is going to be most of the actual changes and most of the stuff that I wanted to talk about. Let's jump over to Path of Building, and we will talk a little bit about the block tree that you may be wondering about that you can use early game. So let's go over to Path of Building and talk about that. Alright boys, so we are over here in the Path of Building. Now this is the normal tree that I was talking about. There's not really much that has changed about the standard tree. However, I do want to mention that if you notice here, there is this block-based budget version tree. This has been in this Path of Building since the 15th of April. So if you take a look at this tree, you'll notice that it's much different, and it is using the budget gear for the budget build, right? You'll notice that there's Razor the Seventh Sun in here, Shernabog's Pillar, as well as some other things. Circle of Anguish is good for damage, but I actually am going to say that you're just going to want to use 2 of these budget rings. I'm going to move over towards just 2 of the budget rings here. This is just life gained on enemies hit by your spells. These are going to be significantly better for early on in the league, especially early on when leveling this build, just because damage isn't too much of an issue in the first like white to yellow maps. However, it does get to that point where you will probably want to swap over to more damage later. However, early on, I think the recovery is actually much better. These plus Razor plus Shernabog's Pillar, you should have absolutely no issues with surviving very early on. Let's take a look at this early tree. Now, I did put this in after they did the updates to all of the skill tree stuff. I wanted to wait a little bit because I wasn't exactly sure what they were going to do, and there were a few changes that did make it worthwhile. So in this block-based version of the tree, you'll notice that there is going to be these Vanquisher nodes here and the physical damage. These are just pretty solid nodes in general. We convert from physical to fire, so these do scale our damage quite well. And you'll also notice that we do have some life here and some block nodes here, as well as block nodes over here and block nodes over here. But you can actually go Glancing Blows and Unwavering Stance, and I think getting both of those are fine. So in the finalized version of this tree, I'm probably going to have both of those in there. I will most likely suggest that we get rid of maybe these nodes here. Like, we'll take out these nodes here, we'll put in Glancing Blows, that'll bring us a 75 block and 72 spell block, as well as go down and grab Unwavering Stance, and then we do have a couple more points to put somewhere else. I'm not 100% certain where I would want to put them. You grab these Aura Reservation nodes to be able to run all of the auras that you need, maybe a little bit more life somewhere, or maybe we could grab like a life node there, and I don't know, we probably will need more strength for crit later on, or more dex or something like that, right? So we can find some place to put that in a moment. However, what I'm going to say is that Glancing Blows is very useful early on, just trying to get your block and your spell block up as high as you possibly can, and then taking all of those block nodes will just give you that extra layer of defense that you can get. When you do spec out of Unwavering Stance, you can just use the God Power that gives you stun immunity for 2 seconds after you've been stunned. That is good for the most part in the later version of the build. However, I felt that when you are in it and tanking, and you are just like getting hit by enemies, Unwavering Stance does end up being a little bit better. Also, you can use this weapon fire damage node if you are going to not be using Sharonabog's Pillar or Razor of the Seventh Sun. It does give you the rest of that conversion, so you can do something like that if you want to. Change that point if you need to. But that is most of the changes to the block tree. There isn't really a ton beyond that. It still uses most of the same points, it just takes some extra block nodes. This will give you significantly more defenses when it comes to actually like surviving in ultimatums. Having that life recovery from the budget gear, meaning that you've got the life gain on hit with enemies hit by your spells, as well as the actual Unwavering Stance, the block nodes, Glancing Blows. You can take Glancing Blows out when your block chance is high enough. If you do get up to like 50, 60, 70% block without Glancing Blows, it's going to be a little bit better to not have Glancing Blows on, because you're going to be taking 65% of the damage from blocked hits. So that's the idea. You can use Glancing Blows early on if you want to. It will give you a lot more block, a lot more spell block, but as soon as you are able to scale that block up, it would probably be better. So this tree has been available for quite some time. I have updated some notes talking about Ultimatum. These have been in here for quite some time as well. So I do want to reiterate to people, just make sure that you do check in the main video for the actual updated Path of Buildings. I do put notes in the video description talking about the updates to the Path of Building, so make sure that you check those out. So if you have any more questions or concerns or issues with it, as always, you can come find me on my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/BigDucks. I'm live Monday through Friday, 11 to 4 p.m. Eastern. I have been answering a ton of questions about this build over there, but if I'm not live or you need more help with one of my other builds or have questions or things, make sure that you join my Discord. Both of those are linked down in the description. I'd love for you to become a part of my community, so make sure that you check that out if you've got further questions. So I think that the build did most of what I wanted it to. I was a little sad with how Ultimatum actually turned out. It doesn't seem like at the moment that it is too profitable unless you're really pushing it, and you have to make a build specifically for pushing it to get it, but we'll see how that turns out in the future. So remember guys, if you enjoy this content, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in your class, and I'll see you guys in the next video.